feeling well this week, so it'll just be me. So this is from Routers. Israel launches new Gaza strikes after weekend attacks, kills scores in a safe zone. Israel struck the southern and central Gaza Strip on Monday to put more pressure on Hamas, following a weekend strike targeting the militant group's leadership, which killed scores of Palestinians who had sought shelter in a makeshift camp. 2 days after the Israeli strike turned a crowded swath of Mawasi near the Mediterranean coast into a charred wasteland, littered with burning cars and mangled bodies, displaced survivors said they had no idea where they should go next. Those moments as the ground shook underneath my feet and the dust and sand rose to the sky, and I saw dismembered bodies, was like nothing I have seen in my life, said Aya Muhammad, 30, a market seller in Mawasi. Where to go is what everybody asks, and nobody has the answer. Benjamin Netanyahu is evil. He's an evil one. Yeah. Woo! Mawasi, on the western outskirts of Khan Yunis, has been sheltering hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled to the area after Israel declared it a safe zone. Palestinian officials say at least 90 people were killed on Saturday and many hundreds wounded. Routers journalists at the scene filmed carnage, with residents carrying the wounded and dead amid flames and smoke. Further south in Rafah, the main focus of Israel's advance since May, residents reported renewed fighting on Monday. Israeli forces in western and central parts of the city blew up several homes, they said. Medical officials said they recovered 10 bodies of Palestinians killed by Israeli fire in eastern areas of the city, some of which had already begun to decompose. The military also stepped up aerial and tank shelling in central Gaza in historic refugee camps. Health officials said 5 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli airstrike on a house in Maghazi camp. In the central Gaza Strip, where Israel hasn't yet invaded, and hundreds of thousands have taken refuge, the municipality issued an urgent statement saying it was no longer able to provide 700,000 people in the area with drinking water after running out of fuel. We urge citizens to preserve what is left in their private tankers, and we stress the need to maintain the spirit of cooperation and sharing, the statement said. Speaking amidst the rubble of his family home, Walid Tabed told how an Israeli strike earlier on Monday had killed members of his family. Rescue workers and neighbors sifted through the debris to search for survivors buried beneath the wrecked building. My mother, an elderly woman, was sitting with me upstairs. She went downstairs, and after 5 minutes, I pulled her out from under the rubble. We also pulled my sister out from under the rubble, and my sister's children too, said Tabet. Those who died are my mother, my sister, and my sister's children. One was 2.5 years old and the other 2. I don't know what happened to them. God willing, may God save them, he added. Saturday's carnage in Mawasi, one of the deadliest Israeli strikes of the war, has overshadowed negotiations that both sides have previously described as the closest yet to a lasting ceasefire. A senior Hamas official said on Sunday the group had not walked out of the talks despite the Mawasi strike. Following the Israeli strike targeting Deif, Blinken expressed serious concern about the recent civilian casualties in Gaza, Miller said, adding that Israel had a right to target militants but must do more to reduce civilian casualties. The Gaza Health Ministry said at least 38,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's military offensive since October 7th. It does not distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, but officials say most of the dead throughout the war have been civilians. Citing a report by the United Nations Environment Program, the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, said in a post on X, it would take 15 years to clear around 40 million tons of war rubble in Gaza. The effort would need 100 trucks and cost over $500 million. Debris pose a deadly threat for people in the Gaza Strip, as it can contain unexploded ordnance and harmful substances, it added. The United Nations said on Monday that it will start bringing in more armored vehicles and personal protection equipment for its humanitarian aid operations in the Gaza Strip after receiving approval from the Israeli authorities. The UN has long complained of obstacles to getting aid into Gaza. Israel inspects and improves all trucks and says it is also struggling to distribute aid amid total lawlessness within the enclave of 2.3 million people, where a global hunger monitor last month said there is a high risk of famine. This is from the Washington Post. The ICC charged Israeli officials with starving Gaza. What happens now? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant are the first individuals to be formally accused by an international court of deliberate starvation. With war-battered Gaza racked by hunger, the move by the International Criminal Court to charge Israel's highest officials with the crime of starvation has become a closely watched test case for international law. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant are the first individuals to be formally accused by an international court of deliberate starvation, one of seven one of 7 charges for which ICC Chief Prosecutor Khan announced in May that he would seek arrest warrants. The only sitting country leaders from non-member states to be indicted by the ICC are former Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, who was never arrested for those crimes, Kenyan President Kenyatta, whose case was dropped, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, who remains at large. The court has convicted 5 men of war crimes and crimes against humanity, all African militia leaders. Israel rejects accusations that it is carrying out a policy of starvation, saying its war is only against Hamas militants and not Palestinian civilians. Then why do you keep killing them all? Indiscriminate bombing. Asked to comment, a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office forwarded remarks Netanyahu gave last month to the French newspaper Le Figaro. The allegation of a deliberate starvation policy is totally baseless, he said. We enabled over 25,500 trucks since the beginning of the war to enter Gaza, bringing over 500,000 tons of food and medicine. We've enabled so much food into Gaza that the price of food plummeted by 80%. There is a full-blown famine in Gaza. There are babies starving in Gaza. We see the pictures every day. Washington has cooperated with the ICC on past cases and applauded its efforts to hold Russian officials accountable for the war in Ukraine, but has been highly critical of its approach to the war in Gaza. Whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas, President Biden said in a statement on May 20th when Khan announced he was also pursuing arrest warrants for war crimes committed by Palestinian militant leaders. We will always stand with Israel against threats to its security. Fuck Joe Biden. But U.S. officials have also repeatedly criticized Israel for failing to facilitate aid deliveries and protect humanitarian workers. This conflict has been one of the worst in recent memory in terms of how many aid workers have been killed. Biden said in early April after a deadly strike on a World Central Kitchen convoy, this is a major reason why distributing humanitarian aid in Gaza has been so difficult. What makes this case stand out, Khan said, is not just the rapidly deteriorating situation on the ground in Gaza, but also official statements by the 2 individuals being charged. The ICC's founding statute lists intentionally using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a potential war crime, meaning that a prosecutor must establish that food and other staples are being deliberately withheld from the civilian population. Statements from senior Israeli officials articulating a plan to seal off Gaza from the outside world, despite the dependence of its 2.2 million people on international aid, date back to the earliest weeks of the war. 2 days later, Gallant declared on video that he had ordered a full siege of Gaza. No electricity, no food, no fuel, he said. We are fighting animals, and we will act accordingly. Fucking Nazi bullshit. On October 18th, Netanyahu said Israel would not allow humanitarian assistance into Gaza until Hamas released the more than 250 hostages it had taken during the attack. Israel eventually relented under U.S. pressure, but aid deliveries have remained far below pre-war levels. Intent is a mental state and is never really on its own visible, said Janina Dill, professor of global security at the University of Oxford's School of Government. But the comments by Netanyahu and Gallant suggest there is an official policy plan to deprive the people of Gaza of sustenance. The strongest link now between intent in these statements and the notion of a policy is the continued impediment of humanitarian aid, she said. On June 25th, the world's leading experts on hunger said that almost 500,000 Gazans, about a quarter of the population, were on the brink of starvation. In the worst hit northern region, 56% of families surveyed said they had exchanged items of clothing for food. Half said that they had searched the debris for something to eat. In a document published alongside ICC Chief Prosecutor Khan's May 20th statement, a panel of independent experts who reviewed the case files agreed to his assessment on all the charges, including starvation. There are reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant formed a common plan, together with others, to jointly perpetuate the crime of using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, it said. In addition to aid shortfalls, Israeli airstrikes and bulldozers have destroyed farms, greenhouses, and orchards, devastating the enclave's ability to grow its own food. Military operations have also heavily damaged Gaza's water grid, electricity network, and healthcare system. Children began dying from complications of malnutrition as early as February, doctors told the Washington Post at the time. There were improvements in the delivery of aid in March and April as the pace of fighting subsided, but aid officials say Israel's invasion of Rafah and the closure of the most vital crossing into the Gaza Strip has made it effectively impossible to deliver supplies. Humanitarian groups have said Gaza needs about 500 trucks per day to meet its basic needs, a figure that was never reached in 270 days of war, according to UN figures. On some days, it has fallen to single digits. Kogat, the arm of Israel's military in charge of facilitating aid deliveries, referred questions about what it was doing to increase the flow of the National Security Council, which did not comment for this article. Relief workers say Israeli regulations on access to crossings and freedom of movement severely constrain their operations. Often they do not have permission to reach supplies that await them at the border, they say. When aid convoys are ready, the Israeli military frequently denies them permission to move through the enclave, and looting has become a growing problem as civil order collapses. The war itself remains the greatest barrier to humanitarian relief. Gaza is now the deadliest place in the world for aid workers. The United Nations said this month at least 250 have been killed since the conflict began. We are running out of languages in which to convey the government of Israel the needs that we have. Head of the UN Humanitarian Affairs Agency of Gaza's office said last month, I have no fuel. I'm running out of warehouses. You're killing my staff. Rather than focusing on individual incidents, Khan will try to build a wall of evidence to make his case. Public statements will form bricks in that wall, but Khan will need to connect those with a pattern of conduct. The question is whether those involved deprive civilians of those indispensable to their survival, either with the purpose of denying sustenance or in the knowledge that civilians would starve as a result, he said. I mean, not only are the Israeli officials being indicted for the starvation case, the ICJ has said it's plausible that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinians, stating that Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in Rafah, which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that would bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. I'm pretty sure they're still going on business as usual. This is from Monthly Review Online. 186,000 Palestinians or more killed in Gaza. This was also in MSNBC. This was all in major publications from Lancet. A new study by the peer-reviewed medical journal The Lancet estimates that the current death toll from Israel's brutal assault on the Gaza Strip, which the International Court of Justice has described as plausible genocide, is at least 186,000. This would translate to nearly 8% of Gaza's population. The bombshell death toll estimate is roughly 150,000 more than the current numbers offered by the Gaza Ministry of Health. If the Lancet figure is correct, then the IDF has killed 169 Palestinians for every Israeli killed on October 7th. The Lancet notes that between October 7th, 2023 and June 19th, 2024, the Israeli military has killed 37,396 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, per the Gaza Ministry of Health. While the Israeli government has attempted to discredit the Ministry of Health's casualty figures, the report's authors write that the numbers have been accepted as accurate by Israeli intelligence services, the UN, and WHO, as well as independent analysis. Data on Palestinians killed by the IDF has become increasingly difficult to collect due to the IDF's destruction of Gaza's infrastructure. Even so, the authors argue that the number of reported deaths is likely an underestimate. The Lancet distinguishes between direct and indirect deaths, Palestinians directly killed by the IDF, and those killed as a result of health implications caused by Israeli violence. As the authors note, the combined total of direct and indirect deaths is already enormous due to the IDF's destruction of healthcare infrastructure, food and water shortages caused by Israeli blockading of aid into the Strip, the IDF's bombing of supposed safe zones, and Western countries cutting funding to UNRWA. In recent conflicts, the authors write, indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times the number of direct deaths. Therefore, a conservative estimate of indirect deaths for every Palestinian directly killed by the IDF brings total deaths up to 186,000. The actual number may be much higher. In March of this year, former U.S. presidential candidate Ralph Nader argued that the death toll published by the Gaza Ministry of Health is a substantial undercount. Significantly, the Ministry of Health only reports the deaths of those named deceased by hospitals and morgues. But Israel bombs Gaza hospitals as a matter of policy, kills healthcare workers, and abducts and tortures hospital administrators. Israel's 9-month assault has sent Gaza's healthcare infrastructure teetering on the brink of non-existence. The rubble continues to pile up with no end in sight, burying untold thousands of unidentified victims, while aid is barred from entering Gaza and humanitarian agencies are deterred by targeted assassinations of aid workers. Last month, Save the Children reported nearly 21,000 children missing in Gaza. There is simply no way the Ministry of Health's death toll has kept up with the actual number of dead, and yet media outlets continue to report it, ignoring evidence of the actual number of Palestinians killed by Israel is likely much higher. As a result, many observers are left with a faulty impression of the magnitude of Gaza's devastation. By denying the world access to the true death toll in Gaza, Israel is acting once again as a complete rogue state. But Western governments don't see it that way, because they are supporting Israel's war on Gaza. They seem to believe that international law no longer applies. By pressing forward with the mass killing of Palestinians despite international calls for a ceasefire, Israel stands condemned before the world, a criminal pariah state. And the West, by supporting bloodshed and repressing domestic resistance to its blindly pro-Israel orientation, will forever be marked as active participants in the genocide of Palestinians. This is undeniable right now, but as the Lancet's death toll estimates show, the scale of Israeli violence will become clearer and more reprehensible with time. As the death toll increases, so does Western complicity in the eradication of Gaza, one of the most documented, shocking, and abhorrent crimes against humanity this century. This is from Science Alert. Universal basic income could double the world's GDP and slash emissions. What if we could keep everyone out of poverty while also tackling the climate crisis? It sounds too good to be true, but it could be possible with a universal basic income scheme funded by taxing carbon emissions, a new study shows. The new research, led by a team from the University of British Columbia in Canada, shows UBI could not only improve living standards, but also boost global gross domestic product, a standard measure of economic prosperity. We suggest that basic income implementation is feasible and could be a potent tool in addressing the twin challenges of decreasing worldwide poverty while reducing environmental degradation. The downside of UBI is that it costs an awful lot. According to the researchers, the companies that pollute the environment could pay for it because taxing carbon emissions alone would generate about $2.3 trillion a year. Environmental damage and poverty both pose huge risks to society, says economist Youssef Rashid from the University of British Columbia. By requiring that major polluters pay to clean up their own messes, or the polluter pays principle, you have a creative approach to address both issues. Worldwide basic income would lead to a boost in global GDP of 163 trillion, or 130%, the researchers estimate. To put it in another way, every dollar spent on UBI generates up to $7 in economic impact, as that money gets spent on food, rent, and other goods. Our findings show a positive economic impact to cost ratio for basic income implementation across all scenarios examined, the team wrote in their published paper. Previous research has linked similar schemes with environmental benefits too. The environmental tax would encourage more eco-friendly policies, the team suggests, although to be sustainable long term, it would need to transition to other funding sources. Another potential benefit of UBI would be making communities more resilient. When a crisis comes, be it a natural disaster or global pandemic, it wouldn't be as disruptive or damaging if there was a safety net for people's livelihoods. So why isn't UBI in place already? It would require a lot of political will and agreement, and there remain questions over the extent to which it would de-incentivize work and innovation on top of the concerns of how it would be funded. Tax the rich, motherfuckers. To lower the huge barrier imposed by implementation costs, we suggest a diverse array of strategies aimed at financing basic income, the authors argued. This is from The Guardian. Money for nothing. Is universal basic income about to transform society? The concept of a guaranteed income is gaining traction as a solution to the impact of AI and a way to encourage more rewarding and socially valuable work. When Eleanor O'Donovan found out she had been randomly selected to participate in a basic income pilot scheme, she couldn't believe her luck. In return for a guaranteed salary of just over 1,400 euros a month from the Irish government, all the 27-year-old artist had to do was fill out a biannual questionnaire about her well-being and how she spends her time. It was like winning the lottery. I was in such disbelief, she says. The income, which she will receive until September 2025, has enabled her to give up temping and focus instead on her art. It covers my living expenses, my rent, food, and day-to-day stuff. The concept of a guaranteed basic income might seem novel or neurotic, but it dates back to 1795 when the American founding father Thomas Paine suggested a national fund should pay every adult, rich or poor, a ground rent of £10 a year until the age of 50. Earth is the common property of the human race, he argued. So everyone has been collectively dispossessed by the introduction of the system of landed property and was entitled to compensation. Today, as artificial intelligence learns from the collective intellectual and creative outputs of humans and uses this to dispossess workers of their livelihoods, the idea of universal basic income as a possible solution is gaining traction. We are seeing the most disruptive force in history, Tesla founder and formerly Twitter owner Elon Musk said last year. Before speculating, there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want one for personal satisfaction, but AI will do everything. The counter-argument is that although AI could replace a range of jobs, it will also create new roles, including oversight of AI decision-making, known as human in the loop. Yet for many workers, the advance of AI continues to be alarming. In March, after analyzing 22,000 tasks in the UK economy, covering every type of job, a model created by the Institute of Public Policy Research predicted that 59% of tasks currently done by humans, particularly women and young people, could be affected by AI in the next 3 to 5 years. In the worst case scenario, this would trigger a jobs apocalypse, where 8 million people lose their jobs in the UK alone. UBI would provide a vital safety net. Under capitalism, you need money to survive. It's that simple, says Dr. Neil Howard, an international development social protection researcher at the University of Bath. He and his team have helped to develop basic income pilots around the world, and like Thomas Paine, he believes that a redistribution of the privatized resources of all human beings is inherently just and is inherently based. Howard likens the large language models of AI that rely on the aggregated collection of human knowledge to the enclosure of the commons, which began in the 1600s and privatized most of England's common land. The commonwealth of the world and of humanity should by rights belong to all of us, says Howard. It has been appropriated by the few, and that leads the many to either have to struggle to survive or simply not be effective at all, so there's justice underpinning the claim of UBI. Contrary to expectations, he says, it wouldn't necessarily lead to people doing less work. It would enable them to do better work or to invest their time in more socially useful activities. This argument is backed up by the 2020 study conducted by researchers at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. It found that unemployed individuals who were previously in receipt of benefits increased their participation in the labor market after they were given a basic income for 3 years. Rather than opting for insecure work, taking any job they could get to fulfill the conditions imposed upon them by the benefit system, they were more likely to find and accept a long-term, well-paid job. They also took on more work. Humans need to do work that feels valuable psychologically, says Cleo Goodman, a UBI expert at the think tank Autonomy. It's baked into us. It's complete nonsense to suggest that there's a faction of society that just wants to sit around on the sofa all day, drinking beer and watching TV. We want to spend a fair amount of time doing something that makes us proud. She believes that everyone has the potential to find their niche, work they're good at, that gives their life meaning and purpose. For example, she believes that if UBI was available, people would do more creative and charitable work. The kind of work that it's now very difficult to make an income from is the kind of work that I think people would move to in droves. And I think that would be positive for society. This is particularly true of care work and parenting, says Goodman. People shouldn't be punished for making those choices. Socially and economically, that work is valuable. But at the moment, economically, it is not valued. Salaries for work that is essential but unattractive would need to rise if a UBI scheme was introduced. We'd have to recognize the people that are doing the work in the sewers and cleaning the streets, and they're doing incredibly important jobs that we should be grateful for, says Goodman. So they should be compensated in a fair way. I think more people would be happy to get their hands dirty if they were being paid fairly. Research on the impact on participants of pilots in places with similar economies to the UK is so overwhelmingly positive that he suggests the resistance in government must be ideological. So until there's quite a radical change in thinking in Westminster, nothing can change really anywhere in the UK. But AI may be the impetus for this radical change in thinking, especially if massive job losses do occur. One view is that basic income has to happen because to continue, businesses need people to have money, people need to have an income they can spend on goods and services, So if you're taking a lot of income out of the economy with people losing their jobs, then that's a problem. It's not just economists who think a UBI scheme will be necessary in the future. Professor Geoffrey Hinton, a computer scientist generally regarded as the godfather of AI, is among those advocating for it. I was consulted by people in Downing Street, and I advised them that UBI was a good idea, he told the BBC in May. He fears AI will destroy jobs and increase productivity. It's going to increase the gap between rich and poor, he said. Daryl West, author of The Future of Work, AI, Robots, and Automation, says that just as policy innovations were needed in Thomas Paine's time to help people transition from an agrarian to an industrial economy, they are needed today as we transition to an AI economy. There is a risk that AI is going to take a lot of jobs, he says. A basic income could help navigate that situation. AI's impact will be far-reaching, he predicts, affecting blue and white-collar jobs. It's not just going to be entry-level people who are affected. And so we need to think about what this means for the economy, what it means for society as a whole. What are people going to do if robots and AI take a lot of the jobs? Neil Watson, a futurist who focused on AI ethics, has a more pessimistic view. She believes we are witnessing the dawn of an age of AI companies, corporate environments where very few, if any, humans are employed at all. Instead, at these companies, lots of different AI sub-personalities will work independently on different tasks, occasionally hiring humans for bits and pieces of work. These AI companies have the potential to be enormously more efficient than human businesses, driving almost everyone out of business, apart from a small selection of traditional old businesses that somehow stick in there because their traditional methods are appreciated. Watson speculates that only jobs that require human interaction, like hospital chaplains and care workers, or involve complex and physical tasks like plasterers, plumbers, and hairdressers, will need to be done by humans in the future. As a result, she thinks it could be AI companies, not governments, that end up paying people a basic income. AI companies, meanwhile, will have no salaries to pay because there are no human beings in the loop. The profits and dividends of this company could be given to the needy. This could be a way of generating support income in a way that doesn't need the state welfare. It's fully compatible with capitalism. It's just that AI is doing it. I think we need to be calling for basic income on the basis of sense of shared morality because economic insecurity is grim. It's empirically damaging, and it's based on historical injustices that are translated into present inequalities. So there's a very strong case for redistributive basic income right now, irrespective of whether or not the machines are coming. This is from Harvard School of Public Health, addressing the U.S. homelessness crisis. Between 2022 and 2023, the number of people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. jumped 12%, the largest yearly increase. The Department of Housing and Urban Development started collecting data in 2007. We're in a crisis right now. Let's make no mistake about that, said Jeff Olivet, Executive Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Housing is a basic human right, just like food or water or a right to education or right to health care. People need and should have access to affordable housing, and yet we live in a country and in a world where that's not always the case. The homelessness crisis is driven by challenges across multiple systems, according to Olivet, who discussed key findings from the HUD 2023 Annual Homelessness Assessment Report. Not only is there a shortage of affordable housing, but many people also have trouble accessing physical and mental health care, education, and public transportation. When you look at all those factors, it's no wonder that we have millions of Americans who experience homelessness, he said. Olivet noted that during the first couple of years of the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government instituted eviction moratoriums and provided emergency housing vouchers, but these protections and resources have since ended. This is from Statista. When rents rise, so does homelessness. According to a Pew Charitable Trust study, rising rental prices are directly linked to an increase in homelessness in the United States. The analysts write that while homelessness often has several contributing factors, such as substance use disorder, mental health, weather, the strength of the social safety net, poverty, or economic conditions, none are as impactful as the role of high housing costs. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's homelessness data and apartment list rent data from 2017 and 2022 shows that of the 6 metro areas where homelessness increased the most, rents had also risen faster than the national average. These are Sacramento, Fresno, Raleigh, Phoenix, Austin, and Tucson. Meanwhile, 4 areas that saw declines in homelessness also saw below average increases in their median rents. The writers of the report explain, There are still places in the U.S. where levels of homelessness are low, either because of those places have low-cost housing readily available, such as Mississippi, where homelessness is 10 times lower than California, or because they have rapidly added housing and made a concerted effort to reduce the ranks of residents without homes. In Houston, the rate of homelessness is 19 times lower than it is in San Francisco, even though Houston's population has grown more than San Francisco's in the past decade. Looking at these markets helps to show how population growth generally does not explain growth in homelessness, except in instances where there is not a sufficient increase in the housing supply. This is from Jacobin. The Supreme Court says cruelty is a solution to homelessness. Last month, the Supreme Court ruled that local governments could punish people for sleeping outside even when they lack adequate options for shelter. It's a cruel decision, one that underlines the need to make housing a human right. Last month, the Supreme Court overturned a ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and granted cities the ability to criminalize homelessness even when shelter is unavailable. The substance of the decision concerns the appropriate application of the Eighth Amendment, whether jail time and fines for people forced to sleep outside constitute excessive bail or fines or cruel and unusual punishment. The court's opinion relies on a comically narrow interpretation of the Constitution. It may seem obvious that levying fees and court costs on people who are forced to sleep outside because they cannot afford housing meets the definition of an excessive fine, but the majority decision is too preoccupied with preserving the ability of local governments to solve their problems with cruelty, even though it's abundantly clear that punitive approaches to homelessness only make the situation worse. An expected outcome of the lower level court decisions, had they been upheld, was that cities would be at least forced to expand shelter options if they wanted to clear the streets of homeless encampments. Now they face no such pressure. But that doesn't stop local and city-state governments from codifying the Eighth Amendment rights of the unhoused in their laws or aggressively pursuing a housing-first strategy. While the Supreme Court's latest ruling is a win for cruelty, the efforts of activists, advocates, and the unhoused to address the homelessness crisis continue on. But many states and localities rely on a patchwork network of shelter systems of varying capacities. Because of this, people living on the street often have perfectly legitimate reasons to avoid shelters, many of which cannot accommodate their health needs, force them to manage addiction in dangerous ways, or simply won't accept pets. And that's not to mention when shelter buildings themselves pose serious risks to residents or when shelter staff are abusive. Several cities in Pennsylvania are preparing to remove encampments with no real plan for what comes after. Others, like Philadelphia, have put resources and efforts into providing more shelter options and stable housing opportunities, while still employing sweeps as a tactic to push unhoused people towards city services. Protecting the rights of the unhoused is, of course, a matter of harm reduction rather than a solution to the problem of homelessness. Yet the harm reduction made possible by the Martin and Grant's past precedents was necessary because real solutions to homelessness tend to lack the necessary political backing. It's much easier for politicians and their real estate owning donors to have the police sweep the problem away while preserving property values by limiting public and high occupancy housing. This politically expedient path has been paved with dehumanizing narratives about the nature of homelessness. These stories cast homelessness as a consequence of personal failings or mental illness, or a condition that is a result of individuals refusing help because of some moral or intellectual deficit. We are told that addressing homelessness by simply putting people in homes would be a waste of taxpayer money. A problem for voters who believe these narratives is that criminalizing homelessness ends up costing taxpayers more than a housing-first strategy. This is from ABC News. Climate change is altering the length of days on Earth, according to new research. Scientists are discovering more ways global warming is affecting the planet. The days are getting longer as global temperatures continue to rise, new research shows. As ice sheets at the Earth's poles melt, the redistribution of mass from the resulting sea level rise is increasing the length of day at an unprecedented rate. For millennia, Earth's length of day has been gradually increasing by a few milliseconds per century. The increase is largely due to the moon's gravitational pull, which has gradually slowed Earth's rotation, as well as the glacial adjustment process, that is, the movement of molten rock in the planet's mantle towards the polar regions, specifically in the northern hemisphere. But melting ice sheets and glaciers in the Arctic and Antarctica But melting ice sheets and glaciers in the Arctic and Antarctica also have had an increasing effect on length of day due to the transportation of large amounts of mass from the poles to the equator. The researchers found after examining the impact of climate change induced sea level rise on length of day since 1900. As a result, the Earth's normal oblate shape, resembling a somewhat flattened sphere bulging at the equator, is flattening even more. A sustained increase of the length of day on Earth has always been evident, based on data that goes back 3,000 years. But the same amount of increase in milliseconds per century that occurred in the thousands of years prior to the year 2000 is expected to occur in this century alone, and climate change is a likely culprit. By the end of the 21st century, if in the high emission scenarios, it could be that the climate impact alone will overtake the impact of the Earth Moon dynamics. The findings reveal the planetary scale impact of modern climate change on Earth, this study says. It gives context as to the gravity of the ongoing climate emergency. The redistribution of mass driven by melting of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets occurred at unprecedented rates over the last 2 decades, according to the study. Fluctuations in sea level have caused the length of Earth's day to vary between 0.3 and 1 milliseconds per century during the 20th century, but since 2000, the length of the day has increased by a rate of about 1.33 milliseconds per century, the researchers found. The length of day could even reach a rate of additional 2.62 milliseconds per century by the end of the 21st century should greenhouse gas emissions continue unabated, the study says. While additional milliseconds added to a day every century won't significantly change day-to-day life for humans on Earth, the impacts will still be profound, mainly on timekeeping. This is from NPR. We're screaming into the void. Across the U.S., heat keeps breaking records. When Joe Pascal moved to the desert city of Palm Springs, California, about 17 years ago, it was hot, but in the mornings and evenings, there was a break from the heat. You could get up in the morning, and it would be relatively cool, and you could enjoy outside, even in the dead of summer, he said. The mornings would just be brilliant. That doesn't exist for us anymore, and it's a huge loss, he says. Palm Springs has broken temperature records one after the another in the last week. The city hit 122 degrees on July 8th, the hottest temperature ever recorded for that day, according to the National Weather Service. Last Friday, the city broke its all-time high temperature record when it hit 124 degrees. Even in the early mornings this week, the temperature has still been in the low 90s and high 80s. Pascal recognizes the connection between his increasingly hot city and climate change, caused largely by humans burning fossil fuels. Sometimes we feel like we're screaming into the void, Pascal says. There's a problem that we need to be addressing. Last year was the hottest year on record for the world. The U.S. is warming up at a faster rate than the global average, which means the effects of global warming will be more pronounced. It's not subtle, says Joellen Russell, an oceanographer and climate scientist at the University of Arizona, who notes her city, Tucson, Arizona, also saw a high temperature record fall this week. We're going to continue breaking temperature records as long as we keep increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, Russell says. In 2015, at a UN conference in Paris, most countries of the world agreed to try to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. 1.5 degrees is a threshold that scientists say could unleash more severe climate change impacts. Given that global fossil fuel use is still increasing, it's unlikely but not impossible that the world will stay below that 1.5 degrees threshold, according to many international scientists. As of June, the world has already been at or above 1.5 degree threshold for 12 straight months, according to the European Union Climate Change Service. As of June, the world has already been at or above 1.5. We scientists have known for a long time, for decades, that as the world gets warmer, we're going to see our temperature extremes increasing, she says. Climate change is already affecting the people we love, the places we love, and the things we love. The good news is that the world has proven and scalable climate solution, Russell says. These include solar and wind energy combined with batteries. Last year was the fastest growth for renewable energy, according to the International Energy Association. This is from Time magazine. Why Beryl's unprecedented timing is a sign of climate change impact on extreme weather. This week, Hurricane Beryl became the earliest hurricane in history to reach the Category 5 level in the Atlantic Ocean, battering the Caribbean and killing at least 6, and experts say that climate change is making it much more likely for extreme weather events like this to occur. The National Hurricane Center said Thursday that Beryl is expected to bring life-threatening winds and storm surge to Jamaica on Wednesday and the Cayman Islands on Wednesday night and Thursday. The hurricane isn't the only extreme weather event that has occurred around the world over the past few days. Fierce storms led to flooding in Switzerland and Italy, and wildfires raged in Greece and Arizona. While research hasn't proven that climate change is the direct cause of each specific extreme weather event, it has shown that climate change can make some of these disasters more intense and more frequent. It's important to remember there was extreme weather before climate change. Alex Hall, a professor of atmospheric and oceanic sciences at UCLA, tells Time, "The climate is variable. The weather is variable. We expect there to be extremes, but it's just that the likelihood of extremes has changed, and the likelihood of these types of events occurring is greater." Hurricanes rely on a warm ocean to form. Because of that, hurricane season usually runs from June through November, when oceans are warm enough for a hurricane to develop, says Marcus C. Seraphim, a physical scientist in the EPA, Climate Science and Impacts Branch. But Beryl is unusual and unprecedented, Hall adds, because it's happening so early in the hurricane season before the warmest ocean temperatures are usually seen. Current research indicates that while the warming climate will likely lead to less frequent Category 1 and 2 storms, it will lead to more frequently intense storms like Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. Warmer temperatures also allow the Earth's atmosphere to hold more water in it, which can lead to heavy rainfall, says Steve Vargas, a director of the Wisconsin State Climatology Office. Intense rainfall often leads to flooding, which can overwhelm existing stormwater systems, he said. "A lot of our infrastructure was built for a different climate than we've seen today," Vargas says. "We really need to take stock of how to prepare for the changing climate as we face it in the future." On the other hand, because the atmosphere can hold more moisture that can demand more evaporation, which can lead to drier conditions on land, according to Vargas. Along with record-breaking heat, these dry conditions can bring an increased risk of wildfires. According to a new EPA report released Tuesday, the extent of the area that wildfires have burned in the U.S. has risen since the 1980s. The report found that 10 years with the largest acreage burned by wildfires all occurred since 2004, coinciding with some of the warmest years recorded. Some extreme weather events can also have cascading effects, Hall says. In 2023, smoke from wildfires burning in Canada traveled to New York City, transforming the sky into an orange haze and affecting air quality. Extreme weather events often affect human health, Vargas says. Beryl has caused power outages on several Caribbean islands. The storms in Switzerland and northern Italy have left at least 4 people dead. In addition to the toll on human health, there are financial consequences of climate change, such as rebuilding or repairing the damage caused by flooding or wildfires. The best strategy to reduce the likelihood of these extremes is to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, Hall says. We need to slow climate change down and ultimately reverse it. Thanks for watching.